Welcome, everybody. First of all, my name is Kathy Stevens, and I'm the founder and director of this and leader of this wacky life that I lead at Catskill Animal Sanctuary. First of all, thank you so much to the Seed for choosing us as their charity partner. Really grateful and glad so many people could be here to share this wonderful experience. So I decided to change my life 12 years ago. I'd been invited to become the principal of a new charter high school, and instead decided to combine my deep reverence for animals, having grown up on a horse farm, with a belief that education, if done properly, should be transformative, that it should leave the learner somehow better, somehow bigger, changed. And in contemplating how I could marry those two things, I, of course, talked to a lot of friends, a lot of family, and they were very supportive. As was my dad. At least I had my dad, because I knew that I could count on him. He'd spent 30 years of his life raising and breeding racehorses, but had a deep knowledge of farms and farming and dirt and land and barns. So his response, "Honey?" Actually, he said, "Shit, honey, what's the matter with you?" But we proceeded anyway and bought a derelict, with the help of a friend, a derelict piece of property that had been used as an illegal junkyard. And road by road, pond by pond, building by building, created Catskill Animal Sanctuary, which today is 110 acres with 7 main barns, 20 smaller barns, several big ponds. So why do we do it? Besides the fact that it's a whole lot of fun to kiss pigs. We have a 2-part mission. The first part is emergency rescue only. We do not take horse retirements, for instance. We do emergency rescue only of 12 species of farmed animals. We also try to help create more vegans. That's really at the heart of what we do, and we'll get to that piece in a minute. This presentation, the heart of this talk, is about who the animals are, why I feel like this movement, filled with so many passionate, smart, dedicated people, visionary people, courageous, tireless people, leaves an important conversation mostly out of the picture. So that's what we're going to focus on today. But first, let me just walk you through the first part of the mission, which is the rescue part. So the animals come from situations that wouldn't surprise anybody who's spent any time in this work, but also from some fairly unusual situations. We do a lot of work with the police and local SPCAs in cruelty cases. We take a large number of discarded animals. We've had a very tremendous number of animals recently who've come from city dumpsters, either from egg hatching projects or post-Easter dumpings. Foreclosures, family foreclosures. There are a lot of sanctuaries that are actually not sanctuaries at all, but in fact are run by animal hoarders, so a lot of them are actually shut down. Sometimes there are very well-meaning people who just don't, this work is not for the faint of heart, just don't have it in them to sustain the lifestyle. There's a lot of institutionalized abuse. We're going to talk a whole lot about that. And then, of course, most of our animals come from hoarders, people who have no capacity to care for themselves, let alone the 200 animals that they lock into a barn and let them fend for themselves. In the winter, it's not just the crazy cat lady. That's our stereotype of hoarders, but hoarders hoard all types of animals. This is Noah. Noah came from a rat-infested barn at an abandoned piece of property. Vets urge us to euthanize him. They didn't ever think he'd walk. This is Atlas. Some of you some of you who just walked in will remember Atlas. Atlas was with us for a year and a half. He was crippled by a lifetime of neglect. We actually had a custom wheelchair for him, and he did fine for about a year and a half. And this is Andy, who was so incapacitated that he could not whinny. When he tried to neigh, all that came out was breath. But here are these animals. It's not rocket science. It's good food. It's good shelter. It's lots of space, and it's a lot of love. And here are these animals today. That's Atlas. Atlas passed away a couple years ago, but that's Atlas with his dear friend, Henrietta. And that's Andy, who was adopted with his best friend, Bowie. So this part is the part that sustains me personally. I couldn't do the stuff that the wonderful organization with Nathan sitting in the back that Mercy for Animals does. I don't have the stomach to do that. I have to be with the happy ones. Ooh. But the greatest joy of my wonderful life is to say to these animals that come in from situations like this, you are okay, you are safe, you are loved. And then comes the very best part, to participate in their transformation, to figure out who this cow wants to be and who this individual chicken wants to be. It is our greatest privilege and our greatest joy to participate in this work. We have saved, through direct rescue and rehab, over 3,000 animals since we opened in our current sanctuary in 2003. Now, I have to do a little thing here because I have a glitch in this one slide, so just give me 1 second. So the second part of the mission, of course, is the bigger challenge. It is easy, it's exhausting, it's relentless, but it's so life-affirming, and the joy is in your face every day to do the direct rescue piece. The bigger challenge is the part that saves countless animals. How do you take a kind human being? I do believe that we are essentially good. How do you take a kind human being who lives in this culture and has never questioned his diet or her diet and say, you know what, you need to. You need to. We do it because doing that doesn't save 3,000. Every time a vegan is created, it saves 70 or 80 or 90 or 100 animals per year, and you multiply that times the number of years that that person lives, and it's profound, the number of animals one person saves by that one choice. So that is the challenging part of the mission. We do it in the way that lots of organizations do it, in part. First, we talk about health. I want to get to the heart of this talk, so I'm just going to breeze very quickly and sort of superficially through these primary arguments. I'm sure almost everyone sitting here is aware of them. But among the dozens of compelling reasons to go vegan is our health. We are the fattest industrialized country in the world. Not a statistic to be proud of. A meat and dairy-based diet causes all kinds of disease and chronic health issues, ranging from lots of forms of cancer. There are doctors out there and nutritionists who now know that you can prevent and even reverse heart disease with a plant plant-based diet. So prostate cancer, breast cancer, chronic diseases like chronic problems like acne and allergies and hemorrhoids. All of these problems can be avoided with a plant-based diet. So health is a compelling reason, and it's what drives about a third of people who do become vegan to become vegan. About a third of people who become vegan all or in part because of this diet's, the havoc it has wrought on this ailing little planet. We're destroying thousands of this is, again, we're trying to get to the heart, so these are just a few just superficial looks here at the impact on the environment. We're destroying thousands of acres of rainforest every day. We have whole bodies of water that are dead or dying, including much of the Chesapeake Bay, where I played as a child because of the poultry industry. 3/4 of our topsoil is gone. How will we grow our food? It takes 500 years to create an inch of topsoil. We're losing thousands of species every year. There were two very well-regarded studies. One, several years ago, one came out of the UN. It said half of our greenhouse gases are caused by what we're doing, how we're growing animals, by agribusiness. A study came out from World Watch Institute several years later that said no, that was a flawed study, and in fact 18% from the UN. World Watch Institute said no, it's more like half. So whether you believe that it's a fifth of greenhouse gases that are cooking the planet caused by agriculture, or half, or somewhere in between, you've got to realize that we must stop this. This is insanity. John Robbins I read something by John Robbins recently that talked about, forgive me if I'm mispronouncing this, the Ogallala Aquifer, something like that, an aquifer that feeds a lot of the states where the beef production is big, that is predicted to dry out within a couple of decades, making, if scientists are right, those states largely uninhabitable by human beings. I was stunned when I wasn't stunned that we had Irene, Lee, and Sandy back to back. I think the good of that, having those three devastating hurricanes back to back, was that it woke up a lot of America to the reality of global warming. But what was stunning and very disappointing was to hear the politicians talking about things like building walls to beat the oceans back, putting houses on stilts. And there's one of the photos I can barely stand to look at. The polar bears looking for the ice that's melting away. There is a beautiful little activity that, if there are any teachers in the room, many humane educators might be familiar with this, called the Earth as an Apple. And you can Google it. It's very effective. It takes 5 minutes. Just a little apple. I should have brought an apple. Just a little apple representing the Earth. Slice it into quarters. Put 3/4 aside that represent the oceans. We're left with 1/4 of the Earth on which all humans and all animals can live. 1/4 of that quarter is uninhabitable. 1/4 of that quarter is taken up by housing and roads, the things that people need. You keep slicing and dicing, and what you're left with in this beautiful little activity is 1/32nd of the mass of the Earth on which that has to sustain all human and all animal life. And then you look at this statistic. Sometimes you read 16 to 1, sometimes you read 20 to 1, But whether it's 16 or 20, let's say it's 18 to 1, let's cut it in the middle. You can feed one meat and dairy eater, on the amount of natural resources that it takes to feed 18 plant eaters. So that's the tiniest fraction of the very compelling reasons to make this choice for the planet. It's the only one we've got. The third one that so many groups do such a magnificent job showing us and working very hard to change is the horrific suffering that animals endure. They endure under agribusiness, which grows virtually all our food, a level of deprivation, torture, and suffering that you wouldn't wish upon the vilest human being you could conjure up. You wouldn't do it. I've looked at, just in the interest of time, very superficially, at 2 of the many animals we grow for food. And the first are the chickens that the industry calls broiler chickens. Most of our meat, of course, is chicken. We kill around 8 billion of these a year, tens of thousands of them in a warehouse. They breathe in the ammonia from their own excrement. It causes respiratory difficulties. It causes burning eyes and blindness, horrible boils on their skin. They live about 7 weeks. Now, what's interesting about this to me is that a couple decades ago, Humane Farming Association had a wonderfully successful campaign against veal farming. And some of you might remember or might have seen it even more recently. The reason it succeeded is because they played on our sympathy that we were killing babies. We were killing 4-month-old calves, taking them at a day old from their mothers, feeding them a liquid diet that made them anemic and gave them scours, and then killing them after absolute confinement in a crate at 4 months. Let me tell you something. These chicks are babies. When you eat chicken, you are eating a 42-day-old animal that died when it was so young that it still peeped, still had the peep, peep, peep of a baby chick, still had its blue eyes. And this has been its life for those 42 days, shipped in a box to a warehouse. And as it grows bigger and bigger, the space gets tighter and tighter. Many of them die of what the industry calls flip-over syndrome, because we are pushing their bodies to grow so quickly so that up to 5% are dead. When the catcher goes in, has to catch 500 birds an hour if he wants to keep his job, so he's grabbing them by the wings and the legs and the necks and throwing them into these trucks where there's no regulation. They can transport on 10 degrees days, and they can transport on 100-degree days, so that many more are dead by the time they get to slaughter. And then they go through this process, and they're not even afforded the Humane Slaughter Act, which had some minor protection, past 60 or so years ago, has some minor protections for the big animals. And there they go, 140 birds a minute, so that some birds, of course, are missed because the workers can't keep that pace. Right? So some of them are literally boiled alive. Pigs have the intelligence of 5-year-old kids. If you know pigs, they are a force to be reckoned with. They are smart, they are willful, they want what they want when they want it. Their emotional life is astonishing. They laugh, they cry, and we're going to talk about this in a minute. But you take this 5-year-old, think about the 5-year-olds you've known. Think about that active mind, right? So you take a mind that has that capacity, and if it's a girl, you put that animal in here, and that is where she lives her life. Right? Being a baby machine. Having been artificially inseminated, a lot of people say it's rape. It is rape. Right? That's her life. 5-year-old mind, can't move, lying in her own feces. That's her life. 5-year-old mind, active, wants grass, wants to root, wants to play, wants friendship, and wants to be able to touch her babies when they're born. When they're born, she cannot even touch her babies. And then the babies, who are also killed when they're babies, they're also 4 to 6 months old, are killed after a life in confinement. Again, a lot of them don't make it that long because of how hard we're pushing them, how filthy it is, the stress to their systems. That's just 2 industries. Haven't talked about dairy, horrifying. Haven't talked about eggs, horrifying. Haven't talked about beef, horrifying. Haven't talked about pate, goose liver and duck liver pate, horrifying. It is horrifying. You wouldn't do it to the worst person you could conjure up. Even if you have a sadistic streak, you probably wouldn't subject them to that. And still, there are not very many vegans in the world. And this is the heart of this talk. I believe that part of it is because we do not know these animals. Agribusiness has been very good at hiding them from us in every way. So the role of Catskill Animal Sanctuary and the role of my books not only is to do direct rescue and cooking classes and camp and all the rest, which we'll talk about, but also to work hard to show people who they are. Who they are. I believe we have a shirt. I grew up in a racist family in the South. I never got racism. I never got it. It pained me. It humiliated me. It angered me. And I left the South largely to get away from that. I do not see what we do to animals as any different than any other artificial division we make as a culture based on race or gender or religion or social class or sexual identity. I believe that in ways that matter, we are all the same. And it's not something I think, it's something I know. So let me tell you a few stories. This is the part, these aren't stories for story's sake, these are stories to help you see them a little bit. Pigs do laugh. Rut, 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 rut. Rut, rut, rut. So, the most magnificent animal I have ever met in my entire life was a sheep named Rambo, who died a year ago this month. Had he been in human form, he would have been a Martin Luther King. He would have been a Gandhi. He was the rarest of beings. And I am so privileged that he spent 11 years with us. A ram guards the flock. Rambo had come from a life of confinement and spent a year and a half trying to kill us, just getting his rage out. But once he realized, A, that he was safe, and B, that we wouldn't confine him, he evolved into a being that I was so privileged to know, who he understood that I was the only one who lived on the property. So when things happen on farms. So when things happen on the farm and it was at night or early in the morning, Rambo came to my house. He slept, by the way. He was claustrophobic, having been confined his whole life, so he slept in one of two big piles of straw at either end of our large barn. And Rambo would come to my house to tell me that, for instance, the cows were out. And it took me a couple of years to realize, oh, Rambo, we are his flock. Rambo is protecting and looking out after every single animal and human on this property. He took his job so seriously. There are many stories in all my books about Rambo, but I'm going to tell one that's less familiar because some of you have heard the best-known stories a lot, one of which was when he told me that by just walking up to me and leading me into an empty stall, he told me one night that we had left 2 turkeys out in the cold, in the sleet. He walked up to me, he went, bah. And I said, show me what's wrong. He walked 60 feet down the barn aisle, he walked into the empty turkey stall, and he looked at me. He knew those turkeys were out there. He knew they weren't supposed to be. He figured out a way to tell a human being. He knew that I would help them, which made me realize in that moment that he understands what Catskill Animal Sanctuary is, and he had empathy for 2 vulnerable beings, and that moment changed my life because it helped me realize, just as I realized as a kid, it's like, and I had a little African-American friend, and my parents weren't happy about it, and it's like brown and pink, and mom and dad, what's wrong with you? It was so simple to me. This was so simple. I realized that everything I thought I had known about the differences between animals and people were based on my lack of understanding, my shortcomings, and not on their limitations. So, this is a story called The Audacity of Love. This is Barbie, a hen who would have been killed at 6 weeks old. Barbie lived with a number of other hens, but maybe it's too strong to say that Barbie fell in love with Rambo, but Barbie only wanted to be with Rambo. When Barbie was sick and was isolated for several weeks, and she came back into the barn, she walked right past the chickens, and she walked over and she lay down next to Rambo. Now, the beginning of the story involves a sheep named Hannah. And Hannah was a little needy with Rambo. Hannah was actually, we called her Rambo's stalker. Wherever Rambo was, Hannah was normally with him, and she'd have her head kind of glued to his butt, to the point where Rambo had hiding places because she just got to be too much. Well, when she saw this relationship Between Barbie and Rambo, she was jealous with rage. And I am sorry, this is not anthropomorphism. I know I am right. When a sheep walks up to a chicken and headbutts the chicken off of the other sheep, that is jealousy. And yes, it's funny. Yes, it is funny, unless you're the chicken. But also, it tells you a very important point about the capacity of these animals that we're torturing. They are the same as we are. So, the end of this story. So I'm talking about the struggles between Barbie and Hannah the sheep. Tension mounted. This is from my book, which just came out 3 days ago. Tension mounted when Barbie began using Rambo as a sofa. At 17 pounds, she is no longer fully mobile, yet she can still manage to climb atop the resting sheep, take a moment to decide whether she wants to face his horns or his woolly rear, and ease down into fluffy bliss. For weeks, I'd heard about but not witnessed this new development in the relationship between the great sheep and the presumptuous chicken. And then one crisp December morning, I exited the feed room, and there in the middle of the aisle were Rambo and Barbie. Barbie was one happy hen plopped dead center onto Rambo's back. Rambo was completely unfazed. I dashed back inside for a camera. People had to see this, and then moved slowly toward them. "Rambo, you are a prince," I praised him. "What a kind man you are," I said as I sat down just feet from them to snap the best shot. And then I heard it. The rapid click, click, click of sheep hooves moving toward us. It was Hannah. She had spotted them. The ball of brown wool pushed past me as if I weren't there and strode within 6 inches of the offending pair, neither of whom budged. She glared at them. She looked at me. She looked back at them. She looked at me. There were really no need for words here, as "what the hell is this" was etched into every gesture. "I'm sorry, Hannah," I whispered, approaching her with consoling words. But Hannah pooped and marched outside, wanting nothing more of Rambo, the interloper, or me. Hank is a 20-pound broiler rooster. Hank has been with us for 4 years. The life expectancy of chickens who escape their fate for whatever lucky reason that might be is about a year. They have all the same health problems that you would have if you weighed 700 pounds. Circulatory issues, respiratory issues, heart conditions, severe arthritis, right? This bird loves this woman so much that when she picks him up, he wraps his wings around her shoulder, which is what mother chickens do to protect their babies. Tucker is my dear friend who was about to go to slaughter because it was the end of the petting zoo season, and that's what petting zoos do. They bring in a new batch of babies at the beginning of next season. So Tucker had spent many years with us, many of which were right in a pasture right by my house, and we have a wonderful bond. Well, we took him and a small herd of cows 2 miles away to a new property that we're we're expanding our sanctuary, and Tucker was not happy. So we decide, every time I went over there, he'd call and come running. It's like, take me home, take me home, take me home, take me home. So we decided to bring him back. And when we unloaded him, this was just about 10 days ago, when we unloaded him, he ran to me and he nestled that big old head in my lap. And for the longest time, he was just going, mm. 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 There are hundreds of stories. People who run good sanctuaries have hundreds of these stories. The rooster Paulie, who slept in my bed because he wouldn't shut up until I put him in my bed. And when I woke up the next day, having made a nice little cushion for him so I didn't have poop all over my pillow, he was right by my head. And this was a bird who had been a cockfighter, surrendered to a Brooklyn dog shelter that was terrified of him and kept him in the basement. And he became Paulie the peacemaker. There's a chapter in my first book about Paulie the peacemaker, who used to break up arguments between the pigs. The animal made to fight could not stand conflict. So this is who they are. I feel like it matters. I feel like sanctuaries in particular need to do a much better job of showing people who these animals are in all their wonderfulness and their individuality and their quirks and their depth and their ability to communicate their desires and needs. Animals live every moment of every day to such a capacity that it would put us to shame. And that is who we're doing this stuff to. We're confining and mutilating and boiling alive. Animals who are the same as we are in every way that matters. So, armed with this belief, it's not a belief, armed with this knowing, we have created several programs to help people on this journey toward a diet that doesn't do this to the animals, that is kind to the environment, that is healthy and will prevent you from getting a lot of the chronic diseases that plague so many Americans. The first one is a vegan cooking class series called Compassionate Cuisine. We have a wonderful vegan chef on staff. We have guest chefs all season, and we have a first class coming up this Thursday. We have a camp called Camp Kindness for children age 8 to 13, in which each day revolves around a species. The kids' favorite is a pig day on which they get to exfoliate the pigs. We have weekend tours that are not like any kind of tour at a sanctuary that you have ever visited, I promise. We have happy, in-your-face animals. We have lap sheep and lap turkeys and goats who will go on the entire tour with you. So I urge you to come, learn, and enjoy, and also to come stay with us. We have a 200-year-old inn for people coming from the city if you want to make it a weekend. The books are about the tough stuff, but they're mostly about who they are. Again, to fill in that gap. We don't talk about them. We talk about who they are when they're tortured, not about who they are when they're given the freedom to make their own choices. This is the dedication of my new book. I believe that in all of us is a good and pure knowing that beneath the surface of things, beneath gender and skin color, religion and nationality, social class and sexual preference, and yes, beneath species, we are all the same. My books and the work of Catskill Animal Sanctuary are dedicated with love and hope to that good and pure knowing in you. Thank you very much. Aw, shucks. Oh, boy. Questions? Yes, ma'am.
Admire your work. I went to your sanctuary and I donate. I just would like to know the animals, are they fed vegetarian? What are the animals in your sanctuary fed with?
What are they fed? Well, if they're the pigs, everything. We have produce that's donated. You know, a lot of the animals you have to feed. The pigs and the chickens, for instance, you have to feed a diet. You have to regulate their weight. So we've got the pigs are on a horse feed. Actually, it's a grain-based diet that's lower in fat. The animals eat grass and hay during the summer. Some of them, you know, just like all our treatment of them is individualized. The diets are highly individualized because you can't feed the old as the same as the young. You've got animals without teeth. You have animals with stomach issues. So we have a massive feed board, and we're constantly changing their diet based on their individual needs. No meat? No. No, they're not, animals aren't, I mean, maybe a pig could, we don't want to go there, but no meat. They're, okay. Questions? The lady who offered me half her clothing because I was cold.
Thank you. Why not? You deserve it. You were called. Thank you for that wonderful conference regarding the animals, the love that you feel for animals. I never seen anyone so touching and sensitive. So thank you for that. And I don't know, I feel it better. How you dispose a body in the sanctuary once an animal pass away? How you dispose them? How?
That's
you.
interesting. For the ones, that's actually an interesting question that we've never been asked. How do you dispose of the bodies? You know, what agribusiness does, of course, is turn these bodies that have so many toxins in them into food for animals. They have a pile of bodies, and the rendering plant picks up. And if you want to read about a gruesome, horrifying process, read about rendering. We do two things. With some of the animals, Rambo, I told you a little bit about Rambo. Rambo was cremated and is on my dresser. With the animals with whom any of us have an especially deep relationship, we cremate them. With the others, we do, it's actually called above ground burial because it's less toxic, the body decomposes more quickly, and it's just a layer of manure, straw, lime, body, manure, straw, lime, and we fence it to keep predators out. And then when the body eventually fully decomposes, then it goes into the ground. Questions? Oh, come on. No. Oh. Oh. I try. I mess up every day. Oh, yeah.
I actually did have that question. How many animals and which animals do cry? You said pigs laugh and pigs cry. Do other animals?
Well, I mean, the emotional range of pigs is remarkably like the emotional range of people, even though you don't want to generalize, right? Because 10 pigs are as individual as 10 people, the universal things that make them pigs, one of them is a wide range of emotions. So temper tantrums, sulking, very easy to hurt their feelings. The reason we believe that they cry, or certainly something very much akin to crying, is that one day in walking through the barn, I heard, and it was coming from a stall, and it was coming from under a pile of straw, and it was Petunia the pig, and I lay down with Petunia the pig, and I put my arms around her, and she, not knowing what happened, and she went, So I walked in and I asked somebody, I said, what happened to Petunia? And Petunia had been head-butted very hard by her friend the goat, and her feelings were hurt. So I think, I mean, you know, cows are a little more inscrutable, very easy to read pigs. Pigs tell you. Pigs tell you what they're thinking. They growl when they're annoyed. They scream when they're terrified. They coo when they're especially emotional. The others are a little harder to read, but when you know the animals you live with every day, like one knows her children, then it's easy to know them.
Thank you for the work that you're doing. I was just wondering, in terms of how you go about rescuing these animals, how do you go about it? How do you know when an animal is ready to be rescued? And
How we know when an animal is ready to, I think you missed the early part of the presentation. You can't just go in and rescue animals. We would love to sometimes, but you've got to follow a process that involves the police, the SPCA, the courts. If you're talking about cruelty cases, if you're talking about animal hoarders, the same thing. You cannot just go in. The laws are weak to protect needy animals. So you've got to follow that legal process. It's very slow. Often the police are extremely reluctant to get involved on behalf of farm animals. And often so are SPCAs. It can be enormously frustrating. A lot of the other animals come to us, especially animals from the city. Chickens in dumpsters, chickens in mailboxes, chickens from a guy was sitting at the bar in the Bronx and watched somebody walk in and put a chicken in the garbage. Chickens tied to trees in Central Parks. Goats walking around with sold, spray painted on half their bodies because somebody has gone to a live market, bought half the goat. So the market owners put sprays sold on the left hand of the body, and that lucky animal got out before somebody bought the other half of him, which would mean he'd be killed. So it's not a matter of knowing when they need to be rescued. Animals come to us, and in fact, we have a long waiting list. And in fact, we and every reputable sanctuary turns down animals every day because you cannot take more than your resources allow, right? Because then you're in trouble. Then the animals are in trouble. So, you know, with the others, it's, you know, we work within the court system with the cruelty cases, and with the others, it's just a matter of managing all our human resources, our space resources, and our financial resources, and taking as many as we possibly can, and giving them the best possible life, and then letting them become our teachers. Do we know if anybody is developing any sanctuary in New York City? I don't know that there's the space. I know that we, every week, are approached by people who are interested in starting sanctuaries. I talked to a couple last week that wants to start a sanctuary in the region, but, you know, in the city, you got to have land. In the outer boroughs, not to my knowledge. I wouldn't necessarily know it, not to my knowledge. If you're going to, are you thinking of starting a sanctuary? Okay, so let me tell you this to all you potential sanctuary owners out there, not for the faint of heart. Don't do it quickly. Be dead clear about your mission. Don't tarry from that mission, and don't just start taking animals. Get your ducks in a row first. Start with one animal at a time. If anybody is seriously interested in it, call or email me, because we walk people that we think have a shot at it, which is the exception rather than the rule, but walk people through the process and hold their hand a little bit. In the back, do we have to go? One more question from the back.
Are animals aware
Sweetie, I can't hear you.
in here? On meat farms, are animals like aware that they're gonna be meat, you know? Like on meat farms? Like she can't hear me?
I can hear you. On meat farms.
Yeah. Are animals aware that they're gonna be meat? Like
Yeah. That's a very complicated question, sweetie. I mean, if you take the system is so mechanized, right? They're raised in horror. They're confined from birth, right? They're confined. So I think they know that they would choose a different life. If you take chickens, they would choose a different life from the life they had. I think they know when they're thrown into a transportation truck that they're not going to a happy ending. And I do think once they enter that slaughter plant, sure they know. They hear the screams and they feel the fear. Sure they know once they get there. And, you know, I've long noted that cows have a horrifying and unsettling aversion to getting on a trailer, and my guess is that because a lot of them have seen their friends get on and never come home. You guys, I think we got to go. Simone is up next. Thank you so much. Please come visit Catskill Animal Sanctuary. And thanks to the Seed for this wonderful support today. Great job, guys.